Welcome everyone to Grazing Horizon. This is AgriProve's Pod series, part podcast, part webinar, or signal, no noise.
No noise.
Thank you, Hobbs. My name is Matthew Warnken, founder and chair of AgriProve, and today I'll be your host as we tackle some of the biggest, most consequential questions in Australian agriculture. At Grazing Horizons, we are interested in creating a space to discuss how agriculture sees itself, specifically by looking at farming and grazing through the lens of soil and carbon, not as abstract philosophical concepts, but as practical management tools that can materially improve long-term sustainability, lift productivity, and ultimately drive profitability for producers. We are broadcasting today from the AgriProve soundstage in Albury on Wiradjuri country. I'd like to call out and pay our respects to all First Nations people, recognizing their role as the original innovators in agricultural systems, where by necessity ecology was integrated as the foundations of the day-to-day economy. And certainly at Grazing Horizons, we will be drawing on that need for understanding of country and getting those ecological insights for better management to make progress in sustainability, productivity, and profitability. Today, we are back in conversation with Hobbs Magaret.
Halfway through.
Whose life and work sit squarely at the intersection of what is now grazing management and geopolitics, as the war in Iran has a direct impact on agriculture and input costs here in Australia. Hobbs is a seventh-generation Texas rancher, musician, prolific social media content creator with a global following, master of ecological adaptive grazing, author, raconteur extraordinaire, and grazier in residence at AgriProve. We've previously been on a journey through the philosophy of the land, how nature sees itself, how cattle fit into that picture, and why the question you ask first determines everything that follows, then working deeper into the genetic level, breeding cattle for resilience, ensuring the right animal genetics are working for the system. Today, we move off the philosophy and onto the property, because the conversation only matters if it changes what you do on Monday morning. And that's exactly what we are here to work out. Hobbs, absolute pleasure to have you back. Welcome to Grazing Horizons. There's been a lot happening since our last Pod episode. We're all becoming aware of that fragility within our supply chains and also how to say and spell the Strait of Hormuz. What's been happening in your world?
Yeah, well, mostly I've just been keeping an eye on airplane tickets to see if I'm going to be able to afford to get home.
Yeah, that's the downside. It affects everything.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and then it actually is it's that class I took my senior year in college, specifically on Iran, appears to be coming in a little bit handy. So the intersection of Iran and grazing, who would have thought it was just so apropos at this point?
You studied Iran?
Yeah. I remember the first day in class, the teacher, his name was Ken DeBevois, he's a retired lawyer. He walked in, he had a limp, and he went to the blackboard and he wrote EE-RAN. He pointed at it and he goes, Iran, not Iran. Iran. Yeah.
So we're all pronouncing it wrong. And you didn't have to go to the map to look up where the Strait of Hormuz was.
No.
There is.
Luckily, I've always had a love for geography. So yeah, it was interesting. A great, noble, and ancient culture, the Persians, and woe be to anyone who thinks they're going to go in there and take over ever. So good luck.
Yeah. Troubling times, but let's roll straight into it, because I think we're looking at how do we actually get off the treadmill. So give me a second, let me boot this up and get a thumbs up that we're good on our... Yes, over to you, Hobbs.
Well, it's super interesting, right? Because our long game for this whole webinar series was that we're going to get into practical implementation. And now this gives us a really interesting framework to get into practical implementation. Because what's the point of all of this thing is to make ourselves more profitable. And if our profitability relies on the fossil fuel treadmill that can be torn asunder by any sort of geopolitical weakness, then we're kind of out, in trouble. So, I mean, we saw this in 2022, right? When the Ukraine war kicked off, urea prices spiked across the world, and that was just because the natural gas couldn't get where it needed to go. Now, where not only it can't get where it needs to go, it also where the urea is being produced is in jeopardy. So this is an even bigger issue to look at. So
it brings that concept of sovereignty right to the farm gate. So it's not just national sovereignty as a national concept.
Yeah.
It's sovereignty in terms of like, have you got diesel to put into plant and equipment? If you are running an inputs derived system, like can you even get the inputs, let alone can you pay for them?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great question, and I'm not going to sit here and tell people they can never use inputs, and that's definitely not the point. But I think the question that we should all be asking ourselves today is how fragile is our system? How fragile is our entire system, right? I mean, if I've been on lots of farms over the last 2 weeks, and people are worried. People started buying up huge loads of fuel 2 weeks ago, and they were probably smart to do it, but all that does is exacerbate the existing problem. So this is fundamentally about nitrogen, and nitrogen is, we've been down the rabbit hole recently, particularly around nitrogen, because it is simultaneously the most abundant, but also important and hard to get a hold of macronutrient that our plants need.
Yeah, high school chemistry question, like what proportion of our atmosphere is nitrogen?
That's right, yeah. Exactly, and I would have gotten that wrong up until probably this morning. I would have thought it was somewhere around 60%. Turns out it's 78%.
That's a lot of nitrogen.
That's a lot of nitrogen, and it's there and it's free.
Tons of nitrogen above every square meter?
You told me that one this morning. What was it?
7 tons.
7 tons above every square meter.
Yeah. Now that goes all the way up the atmospheric column, but like we're actually not in a limited nitrogen system. There's lots of nitrogen. It's not in a form that plants can use.
That's right. We're in an energy and biological framework limited system. So it takes a lot of energy and a lot of biological machinery to break down that triple bond, that N2 triple bond. So that's really what we're talking about. So when we get into practical application, we're talking about how can we change things so that we can bring about more of that biological machinery and energy flow so that we can fix more nitrogen for free. That's the whole goal, right?
Yeah.
Let's go to the next thing and see what we got. Next slide.
Maybe we should do like a little quiz in terms of anyone who picks the cinematography references and gets them all right. We can organise a prize for that, can't we, Daniel? Just ping AgriProve or team at agriprove.io if you want to be in the running for a prize. I think parents with kids will be right in the forerunning. Yeah.
Absolutely. So this is obviously just an indicator of the various ways that you can. The various mechanisms that are fixing nitrogen in the soil that many of us should know. The two most popular ones, obviously, are symbiotic fixation through rhizobium nodules, also known as legumes. Just using legumes. And then the other one is the nitrogen fixing bacteria in the soil. You've got associative fixation hanging out on the roots, free living fixation, the azobacter. And then you have your cyanobacteria that live on the surface, and if you have capped soils, those can't function. And the other interesting one is that the more mycorrhizae, the more fungi you have in your soil, the more that the phosphorus is available, and phosphorus is super important in making that nitrogen work. So, these are all just the biological framework, the biological lattice, I believe you called it, which I think is a great word for it.
So you could go out in the paddock with the shovel, dig into your soil, and if you're fixing nitrogen, you'd expect to see some of those rhizobium nodules.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And if you're lucky, and it's your soil lattice is good enough, then you'll have a lot of those fungal filaments moving around as well. The fungal underweb, as you might call it.
Do you know how much nitrogen you lose from those nodules in a rainfall event?
No, I don't.
None, because it's actually held in the biological lattice.
It was a trick question.
It was a trick question. Unless there's something going on, like in terms of volatilization. But that's the whole point. You're fixing it from the atmosphere. We've got loads in the atmosphere, and it's being held as biologically available. It's held safely, so It's not driving down the pH in soil. In terms of so you do it. There is work obviously to get your soil functioning that way, but then there's also loads of upside in terms of fixing soil organic nitrogen.
Yeah, it's on demand. I mean, we have the machinery to make it. We have our own fertilizer factory in our soil. That's the way to do it.
So you've done the numbers in terms of what each of those nodules worth at today's urea prices?
Have not looked at the urea prices at all, and this is just a rabbit hole that we've been going down recently. But suffice it to say that if you let me get back to you on this. But we'll riff a little bit more on this later. But let's just keep moving right now. I think there's only going to be about 6 slides in this, so it's going to be a lot of time for riffing. Okay, so practical implementation. We've already determined that the amount of nitrogen you can fix is limited by the energy flow and the biological machinery in your soil. You have to have energy and you have to have the biological machinery to break those triple bonds and make that nitrogen available to the plant. So then the next question is, how do I optimize that energy flow into my soil? Then the next question is, well, what does it mean to optimize the energy flow? What optimizes energy flow? What is the most optimized? It's a lot of plants and a lot of leaves that are capturing a ton of photons, right? So that's the most effective way to do it. And the reason I have this slide here is that it shows the benefits of how frequently moving cattle changes the optimization of your soil. So basically, the idea here is that if you're moving your cattle once every 5 to 7 days, once every week, you get sub 40% harvest efficiency. And so what that means is you have only cleaned half of your solar panel. You went around, you did a pretty terrible job of cleaning your solar panel. You just maybe wiped a little bit here, wiped a little bit there, and so you're not pulling a bunch of photons into the soil, because that's effectively what's happening here. We have 3 ways of putting energy in the soil. We also should ask ourselves first, what is energy in the soil? What does that mean? Energy is stored in the bonds of the biological machinery. That's where the vast majority of the energy in the soil is stored, in the bonds of the biological machinery. The carbon-based life forms, the microbes, the roots. So the plants are bringing that using photosynthesis to take the carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere and put it through root litter and through root exudates into the soil. So we need to do that as effectively as possible. Once you start moving your cattle once a day, you get up to generally that 70%. Okay, we're doing a better job of cleaning our solar panel at this point. And then once you're moving twice a day, 2, 3, 4 times a day, you're at 80% plus. And not only are you cleaning your solar panel better and having more energy flow, you're also effectively doubling your stocking rate. And if you double you're doubling your stocking rate because you're harvesting twice as much of the forage, and you're moving more slowly across your landscape.
So a question coming through Hobbs, and a reminder, we are using the Q&A button on Teams. But the question, so if we're looking at these outcomes, how should we be thinking about, what does that translate to, fertilizer need or fertilizer replacement?
Yeah, so I mean, the conventional answer is that you can fix up to 300 kilograms per hectare naturally.
In the 80%, if you're in that 80% short intensive graze.
Yeah. I mean, that's going to get you on that treadmill faster. I mean, you have to understand that when you use nitrogen synthetically, it's a linear coupling. It's you put this input in, you get this input out. And so the nitrogen fixation biologically means you have to get on a flywheel. You have to start creating an entire set of systems that start to work with each other. And the way to do that is you got to just pump that energy into the soil. And so if you're at that 80% uniform harvest, then everything that comes back is really high in leaf. It's capturing a ton of energy, It's putting that energy into the soil in the form of carbon-based life forms that are creating that biological machinery that run that flywheel. So you can get on that pathway. It's the fastest pathway to get up to that 300 kilograms per hectare. But then the question is, how much can we actually replace fertilizer with natural mechanisms? And then the question we should be asking is, what are the dangers of not doing that? The dangers of not doing that is farmers are extremely exposed to the geopolitical stability of the Middle East, which sounds really crazy coming out of my mouth.
Yeah.
Really quite.
Well, if we had started off that in terms of grazing horizons, we're looking at the Middle East.
Yeah.
Would not have gone down well. But you make that good point. In terms of that's now another metric that people need to be looking at as a risk, and it needs to be on that risk register if you're a producer. You are exposed, and then the dangers of that exposure, and then pricing that.
Yeah, absolutely. The betting the farm on the stability of an unstable place is a bad idea. It seems to me. So we should be turning our best, brightest, most energetic minds towards capturing as much of that free macronutrient that is abundant over our heads as possible. I mean, and that's really what the language of carbon is all about. As we progress in our understanding of the independent variables really at play here, it's a carbon project, yeah. But what you're really doing is you're downloading and installing the software and hardware that gives you access to free nitrogen. So coming back to the practical application, it's like we got to be working towards grazing in a way that maximizes that energy flow, that maximizes that carbon deposition. You maximize your carbon deposition, it gives you access to nitrogen. There are tons of little ins and outs of this, but in broad strokes, it's maximize your energy flow, maximize your carbon deposition, and maximizes your nitrogen availability.
So from a practical perspective, like run me through like amount of movements, rest periods in these examples here. Like what?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, and then we're gonna get into in the next podcast. We're gonna get into the ins and outs of what I call the 3-zone adaptive grazing, which applies to the vast majority of Australia. But today we're gonna get into how to start developing a framework to build out the infrastructure on your property. How to start thinking about the framework of the infrastructure on your property. Farmers are amazing and smart and energetic people, and they know their land better than I do. And I want everybody out there to understand that what I'm talking to is just a general set of recommendations. It's not a recipe. You guys have to implement it within the context of your operations. And all I'm doing is articulating a version of my sort of ideal so that we can have a landmark to know, are we working towards that landmark? How can we rate ourselves? So in my perfect world, you're moving your cattle 1, 2, 3, 4 times a day. That's my perfect world. In order to do that, you need infrastructure. Or there is a lot of great technology coming out with the halter collars. There are many companies doing that. Whether or not that makes financial sense for you, we
could do a disclaimer about this is not financial advice as well.
Yes, correct. This is not financial advice
or legal advice. Let's do the blanket disclaimer.
That's right. This is not even advice. This is just two dudes talking. So the ins and outs is you have to start thinking about how you're going to develop your infrastructure. If you want to get towards carrying more cattle, growing more beef per hectare, you got to start thinking about how you're going to develop your infrastructure. So if we want to get up to that 80% uniform graze, how are we going to do that? We can go to the next slide now.
All right. Well, we get to go to a word from our marketplace partner there. So we'll take a short break. I want to mention marketplace partner movement. And if you're running a rotational grazing program, one of the hardest things to demonstrate is that your management has actually changed. Movement GPS ear tags build an automatic activity log of every mob movement, where your cattle were, when they moved, and how long each paddock rested. That's the clear record of additionality that a soil carbon project requires, generated without any extra paperwork. And if you are running a soil carbon project with AgriProve, the data these tags generate, your mob movements, your rest periods, your pasture recovery, is exactly the kind of practice change evidence that supports your carbon credit claim. Movement have just dropped their GPS tag price by 20%. So if you have been thinking about smart tags, now is a good time to take a look. You can find them through the AgriProve marketplace. We will drop the link in the chat. Right, back to you, Hobbs.
Your earlier question about some numbers, it looks like according to the 2022 peak of what urea was, which I believe was about, that was just at $1,050 a ton. It's I believe $1,600 right
$1,600 a ton for urea.
For urea.
And urea is roughly 50% nitrogen.
That's right. So at the 2022 peak at effectively, I don't know, 60% of what it is now, that gives you $130 per hectare per year of added benefit if you're fixing 20 kilograms of nitrogen. Just fixing 20 kilograms of nitrogen per hectare per year. That gives you $130 at the 2022 peak prices. So it's almost $200 per year, and then double that because urea is only half nitrogen. That's a $400 per hectare per year benefit.
I'll do some math fact checking as you go on to talk to this next
please do that.
slide. But so we're trying to work out, what does 50 kilograms of nitrogen what does 20 kilograms of nitrogen fixing give you?
Right.
All right, I'll do some work.
Yeah, excellent. So this is actually one of my favorite pictures here. This is a picture that I nicked from one of Alejandro Carrillo's YouTube presentations. Alejandro is such an inspiration. He has a 30,000 acre place in the Chihuahua Desert, and he's doing what everybody says can't be done. And I hear this on social media. I hear it in the field. I hear it everywhere. It's like, oh yeah, well you can do what you're saying if you have 200 acres and you're on farm all the time, and it's just, this low agency, it can't be done and I can't do it. So what he did was he basically built out his 30,000 acre place into 200 plus permanent single wire high tensile paddocks, and up to 400 if you're cutting those down even more with polywire reels. And the first place he started was developing a map of his place and delineating the most productive quarter, the second most productive quarter, the third most, and the fourth most. So obviously the green is the most productive, the yellow is the second, pink is third, and red is the fourth. And all that means is you start developing your infrastructure on your most productive areas. If you do that, it gives you the most return on investment. That doesn't mean you're never going to work on your red areas, and it's very possible that your red areas will never be as broken up as the green areas. But in order to start accessing that free, sweet nitrogen, you gotta start building out your infrastructure, and you start doing that on your most productive areas. So that's a pretty easy thing. So in terms of practical application, step one, develop a map of your property for the most productive to the least productive. And I think you can go to the next one. Very interesting that Horizon, the AgriProve's carbon model, has some functionality in that regard. You look at the green areas. This is a place up near Tarcutta. Look at the green areas. You say, okay, well that's our most effective areas. Those are our most productive areas. Maybe we want to start looking at that. And then you look and go, okay, well maybe there's some danger there because there's a river going through it. Maybe it's going to wash out our fences. So maybe we start in the green areas that are in that higher ground. So it gives you a target. Then you can start working towards your the gray areas, which are the middle zone of carbon content, and then the red areas are what's called the opportunity zone, where you have the opportunity to grow more carbon. So you look at that, and you can maybe make it even a little bit more advanced, because you can see the erosion potential in certain areas, and then maybe you want to throw a little bit of money and to stop that farm from leaking all the dirt, especially if it's going through a really productive area. So that's one cool thing that the Horizon snapshot gives you. And where can they find a Horizon snapshot, Matthew?
The good people at AgriProve. So when you're interpreting that data, what would you do if you get the report and it kind of like there's a bit of a mismatch between what your eyes are telling you on your farm and what the report comes up with?
Well, I mean, obviously, I would believe my eyes first and foremost, but I can't look at my entire property all the time. You know, that's But what you're going to find is the vast majority of time there's going to be really good overlap. From I actually got off the phone with the guy who this particular property was referring to yesterday. I was driving back from Wagga, and he was just actually very impressed at the overlap between what was on the ground and on the model. And the model has more than that. It also shows the pH, and it also shows, I think, the depth in a certain part of the snapshot. And he said that he could tell the difference in pH on a couple of the paddocks that he had done a trial with. So he was very impressed with that. So I mean, obviously, always believe your eyes, but we can't see the entirety of the property all the time.
And the point being here is that you should not treat the entire farm the same way.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then, because it would be a mistake if you were to go to say like an intensified grazing and you picked those sort of opportunity patches within the farm that are going to respond the slowest, then that could lead to discouragement, versus pick the strong areas to focus your infrastructure and your management change to make them work best. Is that how we should be thinking about it?
Yeah, absolutely. If you have a business with 3 products and you have a great selling product, an okay selling product, and a product that doesn't sell at all, if you really put your marketing budget in the really great selling product, then not only are you going to make more money because people are more likely to buy the great selling product, they also might come and see the other 2 products, and it's going to give them a lot more exposure. So you'll get a lot of downstream benefit simply from investing in your most productive areas. And this is really important, because people get really overwhelmed of how am I going to do this? How am I going to start upgrading my entire property? This is just like an overwhelming project. But it's like, how do you eat an elephant one bite at a time, right? So you develop a 10-year plan. Okay, this year I'm going to subdivide these pastures. Next year I'm going to subdivide that, and then you just take a little bit by little.
And what do you focus on if capital is a constraint?
If capital is a constraint, this is one of the really great things. You need to look at probably your stocking rate. Well, we need to look at why is capital a constraint at this point? Why is our business running on just fumes at this point? Maybe you need to destock. Maybe it's very independent, the strategy you're going to have to use if you're on that edge. All of the really successful people that I've talked to in the Riverina, in the Upper Murray, in this part of the world, nobody finances upgrades like that. They all set cash aside, and then they do it when they have the cash available. So you'll have good years, you'll have bad years, and I think it's a function of how you reinvest that money during the good years. I think also that's a really interesting opportunity for natural asset revenue. That's one of the ways that carbon credits in particular can funnel back into creating more productivity, more profitability, and increasing the overall ecosystem function of your whole place. If you just if you were to sign up for a carbon project, sequester some carbon, awarded some ACUs, take that money, throw it back into your infrastructure, and that's what really starts to get that flywheel going.
Is there a point at which, kind of question coming through, the point at which the strategy doesn't work, like in terms of focusing on your strength areas, going to intensify your grazing management, that you don't get, say, a doubling in carrying capacity?
Well, I think if you're starting, there has not been a single example that I've ever seen that went from a set stocking or a sort of basic 4, 5, even 10 pasture rotation that went to a more intensive management system and didn't at least double their stocking rate. I think Alejandro increased his stocking rate at least 4 times. So I'm a firm believer that
So
the
say that again. He doubled his carrying capacity 4 times. So if he started at 2, he went to 4 to 8 to 16. Is
no
that what
he
you meant,
no
or you
he
went
no
to
he increased his stocking rate four
4 times?
times. So
Right.
he 4x'd it. Um,
Still pretty good.
no, it's remarkable, because your variable cost, your fixed costs stay the same, but your variable costs, rise per animal, and so you get it's a good return, and it's the yeah, once you have a uh, if you're in the Chihuahua Desert, which it sounds terrible and it's very low rainfall, but man, when they get forage, it is the sweetest, most delicious, wonderful, high quality, high protein forage available. So once you got that infrastructure built out, I'm not saying your life is going to be completely easy from there on out, but you're in a good position. So, and also that infrastructure then becomes part of your capital. It becomes a part of your asset, the value um, uh, your the value of your asset increases because you have this capital investment. That's capital expenditure, which is one of the interesting things about the virtual fencing is it doesn't add to the capital value of your property, and so that the interplay and the overall financial ins and outs are very very interesting to see how those play with each other over time.
That was one of the things that I always attracted to me as one of the virtues of a soil carbon project and soil carbon credits. There's a number of upsides. We're not taking land out of production, but this is actually looking at incentives for better management to improve carrying capacity. So we want to move to a world with more cattle, more productivity, which speaks to that ultimate sustainability. And then that proof point in terms of that issuance of the carbon credit, and what we're seeing time and time again is it is associated with that increase in carrying capacity. You do have that now bankable documentation, so when you do come to sell a property, it's not just anecdotal or this is what we used to do. You've got that regulatory grade stack of data to back up why that piece of land is worth more.
It's all part of that big flywheel where you have if you have more carrying capacity, if you doubled your stocking rate, that means you're growing at least twice as much forage, or you're harvesting it more effectively. And if you're growing twice as much forage, that means you're pumping twice as much energy into your soil. More energy in your soil means more carbon and more nitrogen.
More nitrogen fixation. Now, I did do that check on the math. This is where we could be getting into trouble in terms of whose mental arithmetic's better. And just a reminder for everyone to jump on that Q&A if you've got a question for Hobbs. But we were saying the prices now for urea are higher than the 2022 peak. So $1,600 a ton for urea.
That's what I saw this morning.
Urea is 50% nitrogen, so it's $3,200 an equivalent ton of nitrogen. So you need 2 tons of urea to get 1 ton of nitrogen. Now, that by my calculations is $3.20 a kilogram. I know we can give you a free pass here on this, Hobbs, because you don't think in kilograms, you think in pounds and quarter weights and hundredweights and all of those. So $3.20 per kilogram of nitrogen fixed. So you fix 20 kilograms of nitrogen per hectare. That is $64 per hectare for fixing 20 kilos of nitrogen.
That's pretty good.
That is pretty good. If you get up to what you were talking about was 300 kilograms of nitrogen, now it's almost $960.
That's pretty good.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a lofty goal.
So we should be able to measure that. Maybe we should freak the AgriProve dev team by saying we want a measurement of soil organic nitrogen, so that we can actually start to look and do this test in terms of how much nitrogen we're actually fixing on a week by week basis.
I think that would be interesting to dig into. It's doable.
Pun intended, because the challenge is when you go back to the previous slide, which I will because I've got control here, but hard to see nitrogen fixation going on because it's all happening below the surface. So, how do you tell whether you've got good nodulation? So I don't think we should put the challenge to the
All right.
AgriProve tech team. So by the next episode of Grazing Horizons, we will have, well, we can put a beta version in terms of how to actually measure soil organic nitrogen to get a fix on how much is your soil as a superorganism fixing.
Another pun.
Okay.
We're knocking them out.
Cool. So
I think there's just one more slide, and this is it. This is just the overview of what Alejandro ended up doing. So this is 30,000 acres. The giant mountain in the middle obviously was not cross fenced, but you can see what he did over, I think it's 10 or 15 years, building all the blue is the water lines, the yellow is single line high tensile. The point of this is just to say that in the most inhospitable conditions, it can be done. And now I know that he is just harvesting tons and tons of free nitrogen out of the atmosphere by having this. This is basically just this is a logistical framework to optimize energy flow across his landscape. That's all infrastructure really is. And this is why also in the previous Podnar, we talked about cattle genetics, because your cattle are landscape energy flow optimizers. They have to be good at their job. And we think about cattle so much as energy takers, so that they take the energy so they can give us steak. And that's not what they do. They need to operate on an energy surplus, not an energy deficit. And so we need these animals that are adapted to their job, which is to optimize the landscape. And we covered that in depth last week, so I won't get in our last Podnar, so I won't get into it too heavily. But it's at the core of my soul is this sense that the market is asking you to create cattle that are bad for your soil, that are not good at their true first principles, independent variable job, which is to optimize ecosystem function. And if you have twice as many of them, because you have this amazing framework that you built over 10 to 15 years, that's really good for profitability.
So 10 to 15 years is quite a time frame. How does that play around with, like, I want to get started on Monday? Because we said that the challenge, like moving from philosophy to the property, is, okay, well, what am I going to be doing Monday?
Well, on Monday, you go make that map that we put up in the previous slide. You make that your own version of that, and you plan where you're going to cross fence your first one. The things that you can do for free right now that are easy, that I generally recommend, are fewer mobs. If you have 5 mobs spread out around your property, and you do it because it's hard to work that many cattle all at once. Let's figure out how you can put all your mobs together. You can manage more easily with the existing infrastructure that you have, and then figure out how to get some help when you do when you're going to work the cattle in the yards, or figure out how to break it into pieces.
So talk through that logic of, I've got 5 mobs, and now I'm putting them into one. Why does that make a difference?
Well, if you have, let's imagine you have 20 paddocks and you have 5 mobs.
Even if I'm doing like higher density grazing on all those different mobs.
Yeah. I mean, if you're doing high density grazing on all those different mobs, your labor costs and your labor effort is 5 times higher, because it takes the same amount of effort to move one big mob as it does to take 5 smaller mobs. And I know a lot of people are breeding bulls, and everybody has their reasons. This is if you have a reason, I've heard it. So. And I still think that the benefit is, let's just take that number. If you have 20 paddocks, and almost nobody's doing ultra high density grazing or high density grazing with 5 different mobs. Nobody's doing it. So you have 20 different paddocks. You're lightly grazing 5 of them at one time in an inefficient manner, and then you have to move when they're tired of what's available. And so then you move all 5 of those mobs, and now 50% of your entire landscape has been covered with just one move. Whereas if you have all of your mobs together, in one, and remember, this is all hypothetical, and you have to use your own experience and expertise on the context of your own land. I am not saying this is a recipe. You have to, if you put them all in one mob, you're only using 5% of your property at any given time. And then the other 95% is resting, is capturing photons, it is putting carbon in the soil, it is building that nitrogen. So you can manage much more effectively on a much more pixel basis if you have everything in one mob. So and then did I explain that clearly
Yep.
enough?
Okay. So we go to a single mob system, and like we're looking on the Horizon report. Do you then what Monday morning you're gonna go out and just start grazing the strength areas? Is it like again like so? But maybe talk through that like. We're going to collapse it. We're going to build the plan or the framework. So, is that where we'd start concentrating?
Yeah, so what I recommend is that three-zone adaptive grazing. And if we want to get into that now, we certainly can. I think it's down a bit further in the presentation, but the idea is it's just basically the idea that you only want to be grazing a third to a half. If you have forage that declines in quality quickly, like most of Australia, unless you're probably in some areas in Tasmania, or if you're in the Rocky Mountains or the Chihuahua Desert, really high altitude, high latitude, really sweet forage, you're going to be dealing with forage that declines quickly. Queensland, obviously, that's the case. New South Wales, that's the case. Much of Victoria, that's the case.
And there was a slide that you wanted to speak to
Well,
on that?
you can go down.
This one.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is basically breaking down the various, let's just call it the two endpoints of grazing. On the top we have continuous grazing, set stocking. Then you go to a more simple rotation, say like 4 paddocks, and then you go to more basic rotational grazing. Let's say that's 10 paddocks or 20 paddocks, and you're still grazing selectively. The cattle are going around eating 40% of the forage, something like that. Then you have to ask yourself, how long does your forage stay in good condition? And generally, everybody who's listening to this, everybody if you're in Texas, this is generally you. If you're in anywhere in Australia, this is generally you. Anywhere in the American Southeast, anywhere that's subtropical or tropical, your forage stays in good condition for a very short amount of time. And so what you want to do is, in addition to your most productive, least productive, and middle areas, or if you want to split it into 4, that's fine. You also have to recognize that every year you have to be chasing good nutrition for your cattle on a small part of the property, on say 33%. Now, let me explain this a different way. You say you have that 20 paddocks, but let's bump it up to 21 just for easy math.
We all need that.
Then I would characterize 7 of those paddocks as my green zone for this year. I would characterize 7 as the buffer zone, and characterize 7 as the stockpile. And so I would pick that green zone. I would put my cattle in one mob in that green zone, in the 7 paddocks in the green zone. And what I would do is I would rotate them through that green zone. And remember, this is not a recipe. You have to use this in the context of your own property, with your own expertise, in your own business.
But the principles apply.
But the principles apply. Is the underlying principles that you need to at least consider. So, in the green zone, you're chasing high quality, vegetative, nutrition giving forage. That's the job. And as soon as that first paddock that you've grazed is ready to go again, you go back. And then the buffer zone and the stockpile zone are busy sequestering carbon and fixing nitrogen and improving that biological lattice of your soil. And then after the growing season is over, you go into that buffer and stockpile. The buffer is obviously called the buffer because if you don't get any rain, you need to get into that buffer. And I can hear people out there saying it right now. Somebody just communicated with me telepathically. You don't understand the rain cycle of this. Yeah, yes, you're right. I don't understand the rain cycle on your property. But the bottom line is the only way you're going to increase the biological lattice, the biological framework of underpinning of your entire soil is if you allow long rest periods. And it actually works out great because you have to chase that nutritious forage with these low quality forages. And nutritious forage means young vegetative state. And so if you get going back to the earlier slide where you're taking that 80%, then by the time you come back, 80% that's been grazed is in that nice, sweet, uniform, high quality, high protein stage. So, and then every year you rotate which section is which. And sometimes, some years it may be half and half. Some years you may. I know some people who started using this system in Arkansas, and the first year they implemented the system, they only covered 20% of their property when going to this method and putting everybody in one mob.
So 20% had the 3 zones.
Yeah, 20. They only grazed 20% during the growing season.
All right.
And so 80% was ready for the non-growing season.
Yep.
So they could add cattle if they want. They could just let it have a drought reserve. They have all kinds of runway to do what they want with it. So,
because on your place in the States, Hobbs, how long did it take to kind of like work out, what those quantities were, or like, what was the sort of cadence that you needed to apply?
well, what I did was I basically started at 1.5 times the county stocking rate. I probably started a little higher than I should have, but I started about 1.5 times the county stocking rate, and I took a third of my property, and I grazed that 1/3 the first year. Now, the first year was the worst drought that we had in 50 years in that area, and I ended up taking all of the green zone and all of the buffer zone before it finally broke and started getting a little bit of moisture. Now, by that time, there had been record lines outside the auction houses with people dumping their stock. And as I said, I was stocked 1.5, and by the time the calves had grown, probably twice the county average stocking rate. And I didn't have to get rid of a single animal. And I had a third of my place left over, and I only had to feed hay for, I think it was 2 to 3 months that winter. And this is my first winter on the place, so it was still recovering from inputs, from nitrogen fertilizer inputs. The cattle were learning how to be in the system, so I had a lot of things working against me, and it still worked out pretty well. So my personal experience with this is that I just started. What I would say for other people is, if you're just starting fresh, which is going to be basically nobody in this, start at the county average, start using this
local government average.
Yes, yeah, local government average, and then expect to double it pretty quickly.
You said something interesting there. Just it was recovering from nitrogen use.
Yes.
What do you mean by that?
Well, the primary nitrogen use there was chicken litter. So they would take chicken manure from the chicken houses, and they would spread it on the pastures. So effectively, and I went cold turkey on that. I said no. I would and I wouldn't recommend that now. I think dropping if you're currently using nitrogen and you want to go to a system like this, I think probably weaning off like a third at a time per year is probably a better way to do it. But I went cold turkey, and using this strategy, I was still able to make it through much better than anybody else. And only feed, well, most people feed hay 4 to 6 months, generally about 6 months in that part of Texas, and I fed between 2 and 3.
So going back to the top, so on Monday you get a horizon report. You see 3 zones mapped on your farm: strength, stable, and opportunity. And you've got the slides here, and you're seeing a 3-zone adaptive grazing. Would you be looking for like a Neapolitan ice cream kind of like inclusion on all of those zones, or like would you put everything? Like would you try and put your stockpile as the the weak area, or like how do you go about like using that sort of horizon report or that information?
I would try to hit each of the 3 zones as part of the green growing season, each of the 3 zones as part of the buffer, and each of the 3 zones as part of the stockpile. Just keep it evenly distributed, because if your 1/3 is highly productive, then you get into the stockpile, and you haven't grown that much forage.
Yeah.
So that'd be a nice way to even it out.
Cool. Just looking where are, I think where we were is what we're doing on Mondays. So,
Yeah, absolutely.
tensile wire.
High tensile wire.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what we'll get into in the next pod in R is we'll get a little bit more into the 3-zone grazing, and we'll also get into the setup for strip grazing that I have used. Once again, there are emerging technologies out there. Virtual fencing is appearing to be quite a bit of a game changer. I'm agnostic on its use. If you think it's good for you, great. Certainly explore it. I obviously have no personal history with it, but I do have a lot of personal history with electric fence, and it is physically there, and they know it's there, and it works well. So
maybe talk through the lens of labor requirements.
yeah, so I mean that's one of the downsides of being in Australia is that the labor market very, very expensive, which is why it makes your infrastructure planning so important. And why I highly recommend that when you're building out this infrastructure, that it only requires you to say be out there for 20 minutes, 15-20 minutes, run across fence or open a simple gate, and the cattle move themselves. So there are people doing this in Australia. There are people that are doing it really well. I mean, I know RCS has been teaching the cell grazing for a long time, and that's very infrastructure dependent, and it works. And so you have to design your infrastructure in a way that does not require you to build all of your grazing lanes and tear them down every time, which is what I did effectively for 6 years. Don't do that. It will cost you and make you want to tear your hair out. So, use single line high tensile to make your, and also you got to think about where your water is going to go first. So you got to think about pipelines. It's planning. This whole thing. Once you start the planning process, the rest will flower in your mind, and the rest will work downstream. So this is why we're talking about the planning process, because you have to trust yourself that you will know how everything is going to unfold properly, and it will. Just start imagining it in that way, and it will reveal itself to you.
So, smart collars, you're agnostic towards, and anything in terms of automations that's getting you excited, Hobbs, like in terms of that would allow an easier transition to more intensive management.
Yeah, sure. I mean, everybody, I think most people at this point will have seen the fence lifters, which are very exciting. You can use fence lifters. You can make multiple breaks. Say, take an hour, hour and a half every morning, or a couple of hours every other day. Build your breaks in your grazing lanes, and then you can install fence lifters for pretty cheap, and then they'll sound an alarm, and then they'll lift the fence, and the cattle will go into the next break. And then that way they can always get back to water. It's super easy. There's also what's called a bat latch. It's been around for a long time, which is basically a fence on a spring, and then the spring gets tripped, and it pops off, so the cattle can walk into the next paddock. But you should at least go out and look at your cattle, or somebody needs to be out there looking at the cattle at least once a day. That's just a good idea. The human brain is amazing at picking up patterns and picking up what's going on with your cows.
So what about like a flyover drone to look at my cattle?
It could.
And pattern recognition.
We could get. I think then you get into the conversation of are you just going out to enjoy looking at the cows? I think there is.
So what's your hobby?
Yeah.
I'm a cow watcher.
Yeah, I'm a cow.
Well, apparently bird watching's making a big comeback.
Is it?
Yeah. So now we should just all start making cow watching. So I think bird watching you call it a twitcher, like you go twitching. So I don't know what the equivalent for cow watching would be.
I've never heard of that. Yeah.
No, it's a thing.
Twitching.
Going out looking at birds. So go out and enjoy looking at cows and mark off all the different breeds you see in your area.
Fascinating. Well, it's amazing how we kept this to like 5 or 6 slides, and it still just consumed a huge amount of the time. I think that we just have a lot to talk about all the time.
We done on slides then. One last slide.
One last slide is the nirvana of maybe one day getting out off of the need to use the Haber-Bosch process to create nitrogen. Am I saying that's possible? No. Am I saying it's not possible? Also not saying that. If obviously that's a utopian vision, and utopian visions are rarely, never right. So it will probably always have some element, but specifically for grazing operations, if we can build a knowledge base and a practice playbook to avoid having to rely on getting our steaks from Middle East stability, that would probably be a good thing.
Now, that's where we started with that sovereignty aspect in terms of like this is no longer just a theoretical risk. I mean, it's what we're living through, and a lot of people concerned.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the most common practice that I've seen here in this part of the world is you flog your pastures, all of them, during the growing season. You use brought-in feed through the non-growing season, and then you resow annual pastures the next year. And all of those are extremely fossil energy dependent. And I don't want to be a total regenerative utopian, which is so easy to do, and is a very intoxicating way to be. But I also don't want to be a totally industrial dystopian. There's got to be a way to move much closer towards not being reliant on the Gulf Coast countries to put a steak on the plate. That's just not a good idea.
Yeah, and so and that is an exercise in terms of risks, pricing those risks, the cost of those inputs, and looking at those supply shocks, and then doing that what if. But then also valuing or measuring the ability to fix nitrogen from the atmosphere.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which we are going to be having a prototype to be able to actually measure that and start to quantify, like, well, how much nitrogen is your soil fixing, and what's the value of that? And times like this puts it in very sharp relief. Awesome, thank you, Hobbs. Let me stop sharing. Final thought on Monday morning, what you'd like, one thing to do on a Monday morning on the property. What are we doing?
I would get your family together and convince them to throw the herds together and work through the
single mob.
Yeah, work through the
single
reasons
mob
why
theory,
you can't do it.
Yeah,
that's right. Work through the reasons why you can't.
Well, that's probably the more important thing, is like having that discussion in terms of, well, why not do this? It'd be good to get some feedback when you're out driving around in terms of what are the barriers to single mob management.
Yeah.
Thank you everyone. At AgriProve, we believe soil is a superorganism, and when it functions as a living bioreactor, it provides the operating system of agriculture, and carbon is its emerging currency. Conversations like this do help us move beyond data to better understand the stories, the systems, the decisions that lie beneath our feet, the ones that ultimately determine our collective sustainability, productivity, and profitability. This has been Grazing Horizons and AgriProve Podinarm. And if you would like to get paid for increasing your natural capital, including getting paid for increasing your nitrogen, the nitrogen you fix on your land,
So valuable.
talk to the friendly team at AgriProve, where our state-of-the-art soil intelligence platform will help you see your soil like never before. You've been listening to Hobbs Magaret on his philosophy of grazing as applied to getting off the treadmill. Special thanks to Daniel Wortman, our producer, and the team at AgriProve. My name is Matthew Warnken, and Horizon is only the beginning. Thank you.